I hold to date.
Thank you, Brigitte. Can you explain to the Commission the structure of the ballistics services, both within the broader forensic services division and how it is structured on a national and provincial basis?
Commissioners, ballistics section falls and is a section under the forensic science laboratory component, which is under the detective and forensic services. We have 4 regional laboratories. The first one is here in Pretoria, which is considered to be the head office. That's where we develop policies, SOPs, procedures, and we ensure that there is standardization in all the regions. Then we have KZN Ballistics, which is situated at Amazimtoti. We have ballistics in the Eastern Cape, situated in Port Elizabeth. Then we have ballistics in the Western Cape. And besides that, ballistics has got 3 subsections. That is ballistics analysis, which deals with firearms-related cases. We then have what we call IBIS. It's an acronym which refers to Automated Ballistics Identification System, which falls under ballistics. And we have a further subsection which is called Mechanical and Metallurgical Engineering section.
Thanks, Brigadier. We'll get into the ballistics and ABIS subsections in some detail later in your statement. Can you tell the Commission briefly what mechanical engineering and metallurgical subsection does within the ballistics section?
Commissioners, the mechanical subsection is a section which is only, we only have one office here in Pretoria and Western Cape. They are responsible for accidents, reconstructions, filament reconstructions, filament examinations, failure analysis, where there's alleged that a vehicle was involved in an accident and the other driver alleges that there was fault in within the vehicle. They do those kind of examination. They reconstruct the scene. They determine the speed at which the vehicle was traveling during the accident. So they are a engineering subsection of the ballistics commissioners.
But if I understand you correctly, they don't deal with firearm and ballistics issues. They deal with other engineering issues. That
No, commissioners, they don't.
Brigadier, in paragraphs 8 to 10, you give certain statistics about the spread of analysts and the quantity of case files and the backlog. I don't want to address them now because the significance of these figures will become much more apparent once we've addressed the detail of your statement and once the commissioners and people watching understand the implications of these figures more from how the ABIS system works, how the FSL system works. So we'll come back to them later. And let's for now move to paragraph 11 on page 4, where you discuss the ballistics analysis process. And can you take the Commission through what you say in paragraphs 11 and 12?
Commissioners, basically here, I outlined the process of ballistics in a layman's term. Ballistics section conducts forensic analysis of firearms, ammunitions, and related evidence for criminal investigations. The unit's objective is to analyze and preserve evidence that can identify a specific firearm used in a crime, including linking evidence of analyzed firearms to other crime scenes. The theory is that when a bullet is discharged from a firearm, they leave unique striations, marks on both the bullet and the cartridge case, which could link a particular firearm to a specific crime scene. These striations marks are created by the passage of the bullet through the barrel of the firearm. Impression marks are created by impact with the firing pin the breech face mark, and the ejector marks on the cartridge case. Both the striation and impression marks are unique to that firearm, just like fingerprints. Ballistic analysts then link a firearm to a crime through the examination of these ballistics marks through a comparison microscope.
Your first sentence when dealing with paragraph 12 says that the theory is that when bullets are discharged from firearms, they leave unique striation marks. Is it a theory or is it reality?
Commissioner, is a reality.
Okay. And so to sort of develop the analogy that you just used, each gun, as it were, leaves its fingerprints on the bullets that it fires and the cartridge cases that are fired in the process. And then your section compares the fingerprints that the gun will leave on the fingerprints of the exhibits that you have found on crime scenes. Would that be a correct development of the analogy?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So if you had 5 firearms and you have this cartridge, would you be able to tell from examining that cartridge that it was fired from a specific firearm out of the 5?
Most definitely, Commissioners, I will be able to tell.
And that's what the exercise essentially entails?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Of course, there may also be another situation where it's not fired from any of the 5 firearms.
You will be able to, yes. Yes.
But if you know if you're told it's fired from one of these 5, you will always be able to identify which one of the 5 it is.
Most definitely, Commissioners.
In paragraph 13, you talk about the range of different examinations that the ballistics analysts perform. Can you take the Commission through those?
Commissioners, we've got different categories of examination that we perform. Without going into the specifics, I'll say, firstly, we do firearm identification. That is, a firearm has a caliber, the manufacturer, the make. We determine those. We determine the functionality of the weapon to see if it's in working condition or whether it's defective. Because in some instances, you will find a person says charged with attempted murder or murder. You'll have to determine first if that firearm was defective or was working. We also analyze ammunitions to determine if the ammunition is in working conditions, where in circumstances where a person is charged for possession of unlawful ammunition, for example. For the purpose of sentencing, the court will want to know is this a real ammunition and is it working in a sense of the Firearms Control Act compliance. And we also restore obliterated serial numbers on firearms. You find criminals that are using firearms, they don't want the firearms to be identifiable, so they file off the serial numbers. So we also try to retrieve the serial number so that we can establish the ownership of that particular firearm. We also reconstruct crime scenes in an instance where we want to know the trajectory, where was the shooter when the incident happened. That is, we do that on outside in the crime scene. We go out to attend the crime scene to be able to determine that. And we also analyze tool marks in cases of house robberies where a tool is used to force open to gain entry. When the tool is recovered, it is brought to the lab for us to determine if it's the correct tool or the right tool which was used to open. Or in some cases, in copper theft cases, we also determine the tool that was used to cut the copper, if the suspect is arrested with the tool and the copper as exhibit commissioners.
Thank you, Brigadier. If I can just take you back to 13.1, where you speak of firearm identification and comparison of fired bullets and cartridge casings to determine if they were fired from the same weapon. Is that the process that we just described in relation to comparing the fingerprint of the gun with the fingerprint left on the cartridges or casings found on the crime scene.
That is correct, Commissioners.
And then maybe if we can illustrate these processes with reference to one of the reports that we have attached as an annexure to your statement. Can I ask you to go to the annexures bundle, and on page 20 of the annexures bundle, there is an affidavit by, is it warrant officer? Yeah, it is warrant officer Makgotle.
I've got it, Commissioners.
Now, this report is referred to in your statement in a different context, but we can use it to illustrate the points that you've just made. So, when you speak of firearm identification at paragraph 13.1 of your main statement, can I ask you to go to page 25 of the annexure bundle and look at paragraphs 10.1 and 10.3. We'll leave 10.2 out for a moment because we're going to come back to it in due course. And in 10.1, a warrant officer Makgotle concludes that the bullets mentioned in 3.3 were fired from the firearm mentioned in 4.1. Is that the sort of process that you're describing in relation to firearm identification in 13.1?
That is correct, Commissioner. What the analyst will do, the analyst will take the firearm in question and go and shoot tests in a tank with water so that he retrieved a prestige bullet which is still not damaged, and the cartridge case as sample. Those will be his reference sample. Then he will take that bullet which he has shot. He will compare that bullet with the bullet which is retrieved from either during autopsy or the crime scene. Through the comparison microscope, he will put them side by side to see if he can see similar marks. And that is basically the process. If the test that he shot himself was indeed fired in the same firearm which was received from the crime scene, he will see those marks. And through those marks, he will make a positive finding like he has done under paragraph 10.1, Commissioners.
Thank you, Brigadier. Let's go back to, just keep a finger in both files as they are. 13.2, you were speaking about weapons functionality and defects. Can I ask you to go to page 24, paragraph 7.1 of the ballistics report that in the annexures file? And am I correct that what we see there in 7.1 is the conclusion of the process, the conclusion in that case of the analytic process you describe in 13.2?
That is correct, Commissioners. Here as well, before the analyst can embark on testing the firearm in the shooting tank, the analyst will go through by analyzing the firearm, stripping it to check if it has got all its parts, is safe first to be tested, and if there is no any defects, then only then he can conclude that the firearm functions normally without any obvious defects.
Then going back to 13.3, you speak of the identification of the caliber and type of ammunition, you say used in a crime. Can I ask you to go to page 23 of the report and look at paragraph 6, read with paragraphs 4.12 and 4.13, and is that the sort of, is that a conclusion from the process that you are describing in 13.3?
That is correct, Commissioners. What the analyst will do here, say for example, received 5 cartridges that he must determine if they are they are originals. The analyst will take a sample and he will open one from the samples to check if it has got all the components of a cartridge case. That he will check if there's a propellant, there is a primer, there's a cartridge, there's a bullet, those 4 components which made a complete cartridge. The analyst will check if those exhibits that he has received comply with that. They do have those 4 components. If he's happy, then he knows that these cartridges are indeed live ammunition. Then he will then depose an affidavit to that effect.
Thank you, Brigadier. And the last example, if you can go to page 25, paragraph 11 of the report, and read with paragraph 13.4 of the statement, which deals with restoration of obliterated serial numbers. And can you comment on paragraph 11 of the report in that context?
Commissioners, as I've indicated, that in some instances, you find firearms where the serial numbers has been filed off. We have a technique that we used, is called restorations of obliterated alphanumeric figures on metals. The techniques uses chemicals that are applied on the surface where the serial number has been erased. So the analyst, before he testifies the firearms, will take the firearm to the laboratory, apply the chemicals in order to try to retrieve the serial numbers which were released, which were filed off on the particular firearm. And upon completion, the procedure of the lab says that another independent analyst will come and verify the results and sign on the worksheet of the member, indicating the results that the analyst has found. It's a measure that management has put into place so that we retain the credibility of the technique.
Yes.
Brigadier, in paragraph 11 of this report that we're looking at, the analyst records that he was unable to determine the serial number of the pistol in question. I understand, or I understand, it has been reported to me that at a later stage the same process was done by a different analyst in the SABC ballistics section, and that analyst was able to retrieve the serial number of the pistol in question. Are you able to confirm that?
Commissioners, it only came under my attention during the testimony in this commission that the analyst in the other laboratory was able to retrieve the number. So I was not privy to that information until I hear it during the testimony, Commissioners.
The other laboratory, would that be Manzumtoti?
That is correct, Commissioners.
And are you, outside of the processes of the Commission, are you now aware that in fact the serial number has been recovered?
Based on the testimony, I am now aware that the other analyst was able to retrieve the serial number, Commissioners.
Mr. Chairperson, if I may, Brigadier, what would have happened that this analyst in Silverton was unable to determine the serial number? You have described a process, the serial number reconstruction process, which suggests on the face of it rather, that you should be able to always to recover the serial number, or to reconstruct the serial number. Now you have an analyst here who says, I was unable. It must suggest something. Either your capability is less, it doesn't always deliver, or he simply didn't follow a process that you say you have protocols, there are ways of doing it. He didn't do that.
Before I answer, I just want to make the following remarks, commissioners. There's no guarantee, firstly, that you'll always be able to retrieve the serial number based on various aspects. For example, how deep was the serial number erased? Some criminals use a grinder to erase the serial numbers. But like I said, we have measures in place that we have implemented to safeguard the credibility of the techniques. Like that another analyst must come and sign and confirming or verifying the findings, whether it's negative or positive, whether you have been able to recover the serial number. In this instance, what would happen? For one to know what happened, you need to investigate. The lab has a procedure of handling complaints from customers. If a client comes and say, I'm not happy with the findings, I've got these results, and I took the case to so and so, or I think I'm going to give a typical example. For example, you have a murder that happened, and there are eyewitnesses on the scene. A person is arrested in possession of a firearm. A cartridge case is collected on the scene. They are both brought at the lab. An analyst examines the firearms and he says it's negative. The investigating officer will say, no, I don't understand, because I've got eyewitnesses who saw the suspect shooting the deceased. How can you say it's negative? From where I'm seated, I cannot say you are right or wrong. All what I can say is that I've got a process, I've got a system in process where I must investigate the complaint. Through the investigation, that is when you will establish what actually transpired, because there are logs that the member must complete when they start with the process. They must indicate which process they've used. So for you to investigate, you will need to go through that process. Then you can only, at some point, the problem could be with the system. Maybe the chemicals, for example, are expired, and the members used expired chemicals, or there could be other factors that could have contributed to him not finding the results. But seated here, I cannot say without proper investigation, when a complaint is received, I cannot say what transpired, unfortunately, commissioners.
So the verification process by a second person, you say whether the results in negative or positive, there is a verification by a second person. The verification process is not automatic. According to your protocols, it's subject to a complaint. If there is a complaint, only then there is a verification. I'm just trying to understand your processes.
Commissioner, the verification is built into the process. So each analyst, upon completion of the etching process, they must have someone to come and verify and sign.
Thank you.
In your second last response, Brigadier, you said that the analyst must indicate which process they used. That to me suggests that there's more than one process. Is that so? Remember, what we are dealing with is establishing what the serial number is, where it has been obliterated. So is there more than one process?
Commissioner, that is correct, depending on the materials. The materials of firearms are not the same. So that's why we have different techniques. Say, for example, a firearm commonly known as Z88, which is issued to police officers. The frame of that firearm is alloy. Alloy is not magnetic. So in that instance, you will have to use chemicals if you want to retrieve the serial number. Where they've got metal, which is magnetic, you'll use magnetic yoke. That's another technique. So in short, yes, the process, the techniques it's not one technique, commissioners.
Thank you.
Maybe just one last question. Your answer that in terms of protocol, the built-in mechanism, there has to be a second person that does the verification of a positive or negative result. If that is so, then somewhere in the lab there should be a record which if things were done properly, there must be a record that shows that there was verification by a second person of this negative result.
Yes, certainly, commissioners, there will be.
Thank you.
Brigadier, if we move on to paragraph 14, from paragraph 14, you describe first the forensic science laboratory administrative system and then the ABIS system. Can you take the Commission through what you say from paragraph 14 and just explain the difference between what happens in the forensic science lab and what happens in the ABIS system?
Commissioners, in short, the FSL admin system, which we call Forensic Science Laboratory Administration System, is a software that is used to manage or used for the administrations and management of forensic science laboratory cases. It's a system where lab numbers or laboratory numbers, unique laboratory numbers are generated for a specific case. It's a system where you keep records. It keeps the chain of custody. When you hand in an exhibit to someone, you hand it through the system. When you want to find out what happened to this case file or exhibit, you go in the system, it gives you a trail, what happened to that exhibit, to whom is it in possession. So that is the FSL admin system.
And if I can just stop you there and to pick up from Commissioner Baloy's last question, would this FSL admin system be the place where you could go to establish who it was who reviewed and confirmed the conclusion of Warrant Officer Magotloe that the serial number could not be retrieved? Would that information be stored on the FSL administration system?
No, Commissioner, that information will be stored in the work notes of the member inside the case file. Those are the workbench procedures. The forms that the member completes will be kept in his case files.
And is that the same case file in which the ballistic exhibits will also be kept?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Thank you, Brigadier. If you can then move to paragraph 16 and describe the ABIS system.
Commissioners, firstly, as the South African Police Services, we pride ourselves of having acquired this type of a system to assist us to automate the ballistic process. Because of the high level of violent crime that we experience, which involves firearms, it is imperative to have a system that is going to automate the system. And this is the kind of system that we have. We started using this system in 1997 up till to date. What the system does, it captures and compares digital images of bullets and cartridge cases to link firearms used in different crimes. And perhaps if the Commissioner wants me to go through how it works.
Please do.
Yes.
And the Commissioners or I might stop you partway through just to amplify your explanations.
The system scans and takes high-resolution digital images of bullets and cartridge cases, including the unique marks like firing pin impression, firing pin marks, and breech face mark patterns.
Can I just stop you there, because you have physically shown the system to us, and maybe if you can just describe physically how that scanner operates. Maybe if I can take you through step by step. The ABIS analyst will receive a case file with exhibits in it. What's the first thing that ABIS analyst does once he or she has the exhibits in front of the machine?
Commissioners, once the IBIS analysts have the particular docket or case files with the exhibit that needs to be acquired on the system, they will first capture the details of the case. That is the station name, case number, the lab number, the details of the exhibit, the cartridge case, the caliber, the make. They will capture how it is marked. They will first capture the image, the information on the system. And thereafter, they will instruct the system to open what we call a cartridge case holder. Once the system does that, once the information is captured, the specimens or the cartridge case will be inserted into the cartridge case holder and closed. Once closed, the system automatically scans through high definition, scan through the images of that cartridge case, as I've indicated, and store that image in the system. It capture it in high definition, so it magnifies the mark, which cannot be seen through naked eye. The system magnifies the marks and capture them on the system, commissioners.
And Brigadier, before we get to the next stages, maybe we can illustrate what you're describing in relation to the images that are scanned by going to the annexure file at page 5, where you have attached the printouts from the exhibits. Well, it starts at page 1. You've attached printouts from the exhibits in the Bramley file. Let's start at page 1. And can you just describe to the commissioners what are these images that we see on the right-hand side of page 1 of the annexure?
Commissioners, this is the back of a cartridge case. In the middle, if you see on the pic, that's where the firing pin hits the primer in order to ignite the propellant for the bullet to be discharged from the firearm. So as that firing pin hit that primer, the primer is soft material. It leaves marks. Around that firing pin in the middle is a breech face. When the breech face is impressed on that soft material, it also leaves marks. So what this system does, it captures those marks. This is a typical example of how those marks were captured by the system.
And if you can, if we see the 4 images below the big image at the top, what is in the red circle on the image in the top left-hand corner?
Here, Commissioner, is just different angles that are taken. The red one indicates the firing pin, and the out one is the breech face. So it's just images, because the system takes different images, different angles according to the light, and this is just the different angles which were captured by the system.
And again, if we go, well, correct me, explain to me, are these 4 images of there are obviously 4 images of the same cartridge case, and are they just taken at different zoom lengths and different angles, or is there any other difference that we need to be aware of?
That is correct, Commissioner. It is one cartridge case taken from different angles.
And different, I may be wrong, but it seems to me that there is a different level of magnification as well in some of these images. Some are zoomed further in than others.
That is correct, Commissioners. I must just add, Commissioners, that during the capturing of the information, the system also keep records of the analyst who captured the image during the creation and the date and the time of when the images were created on the system, Commissioners.
Maybe if you can take us through page 1 of Annexure MNN1 and just explain what each one of these entries reflects.
The first one, Commissioners, is the case details, as I've explained. The particulars of the station name, the lab numbers, and the date when it was created and by whom. And then the second one
sorry, Brigitte, let's take them one by one. Case number. If I understand, that would be the unique number normally that your laboratory attaches to each ABIS file.
That is correct, Commissioner. That will be the lab number.
The lab number. We know that in this particular case, it isn't in fact the lab number, it was the FSL number, but we'll come to that later. The next one, site name.
The cartridge case exhibit details.
We're going one by one down the entries under case details.
Then it will give you the site, because I've said we've got 4 regional laboratories. So the system will require you to, for example, if you are in Pretoria, it will state PTA, then the number of the workstations that you acquire. We've got different workstations. So in this instance, the site where the specimens was acquired is in Pretoria, and the workstation that was acquired is BRX2, Brass Tracks 2. And then the original agency, it will be Bramley. Then the case number.
And originating agency, that would refer to the fact that it's the Bramley police station that opened up the original SABC CAS file.
That is correct, Commissioners. And then it will ask you to state the type of an offense. In this
before you get there, original agency reference, that's the case number that was assigned to this investigation by the Bramley SAPS police station.
That is correct, Commissioners.
And you also have an original agency contact line item, but that wasn't filled in this case. And that would be, I presume, the investigating officer. If it is filled in a case, it's usually the investigating officer at the SAPS police station that holds the CAS file.
That is correct, Commissioner, if the details were available.
What does high profile refer to?
Commissioner, here is just an option on the system, for example, which is an option that sometimes you tick, but it just refers to high profile case if you know. But in most cases, the person who is acquiring wouldn't know if this is a high profile case. For them, all cases are the same.
Thank you, Brigadier.
The answer normally be yes or no. What would you tick there? Where it says high profile, what would you say?
Normally you'll just make comment. There's a drop box where the analyst will just make a comment to Commissioner.
Yes. Event type?
There's a drop box where you choose murder, homicide, then they just choose whichever is applicable, Commissioners.
And then it says supervisor. And what normally goes under well, in this case, there is no entry on supervisor. Is that a problem?
No. Some of the fields are there, but you may not use all of them, Commissioners, on the system.
Occurrence, is that the date of the alleged crime?
Commissioner, I must just first explain how the system uses the date, the format. You know, we use the format, we start with the day and the month and the year. But the system is designed in such a way that it starts with the month and the day and the year. In other words, this particular entry was created on the 4th, which is April and the 30th, that is the day and the year. It's sometimes confusing because this is not the format that we are used to when we write date, commissioners.
It's sort of North American date format.
That is how the system is designed, commissioners.
Where does the system come from?
Commissioner, the system was designed by Canadians. It comes from Canada, commissioners.
And then creation, what does that refer to?
Commissioner, that is when the analyst acquired these specimens or the date. So it means it was acquired on the 9th. I mean, again, that 9 is September. The day is the 6th of September 2024. That is, and the time, 11:01. That is when the analyst acquired these specimens on the IBES system, commissioners.
And then created by Modise AS, that would be the analyst who first acquired it on the system.
That is correct, commissioners.
Then there are modification dates. And how would an exhibit of this nature ever be modified?
It's also one of the fields that is on the system. After acquisition, the system synchronizes. Maybe after every 10 specimens that we have acquired, you synchronize. It's just to take your work and push it to the data concentrator where the comparison is going to take place. But those are the fields that are there. Obvious, once she is done with the acquisition, she will press OK, then that will signify the modification.
I mean, in this case, there is no modification because the date and time of the
It's the same.
are the same.
That is correct, commissioners.
Then under comments, it says 29 hits. Can you explain that?
Commissioner, it's just one field that the analyst fills, complete, but at this point I can't say what that 29 hits is signifying, Commissioner, because here we were just acquiring, we're just in a process of acquiring. So it's a comment on the system as well, which the analyst has an option to complete or not.
But would that, I mean, is that a comment that has to be included by the analyst, or is that something that the system will automatically, if the system records hits at a later stage, and we know the system does, and then as we take you through your evidence, you'll explain how hits are confirmed. Who would have put in 29 hits? Would the system generate that itself, or would would someone have had to have entered it? And if someone has entered it, would you be able to trace when someone had entered it?
Commissioner, this comment is a comment which would have been completed by the system automatic because when these printouts were made, there were processes that took place on the background of the system. So this would be a comment that comes from the system.
So if we go to the bottom of the page, we have a date. And if it's in the North American bottom left-hand corner, if we have the North American dating system, that's 20 October this year. It's last week. Bottom left-hand corner. Do you see that date?
I see it, commissioners.
So are you then saying that as of that date, 20 October, the ABES system would have recorded 29 hits for this, on this specific cartridge?
That is correct, commissioners.
Can we go further down and look at the line items on cartridge case exhibit details? Before we do that, Is it possible through the system to go back in time and to see, does the system have functions that will tell us that although on the 20th of October 2025 the system had recorded 29 hits, at say December 2024 the system had recorded no hits, or it had recorded 5 hits. Does the system have that functionality?
As I said, the system keeps logs of everything which is happening. So if you go back, but with hits, the operator will always update if a hit is made. And on the day when they update the system, it will give history of that transaction. So, say for example, if the hits were identified maybe in December 2024 as being 20 possible hits, and they update them, and maybe in January the hits are confirmed, the operator will go to the system and update that those 20 possible hits are now confirmed, and he will tick them. So that track and trace will be there on the system, Commissioners.
And could we get a timeline? I mean, would you be able to generate a timeline from the system of when confirmed hits on these cartridges, and indeed on all cartridges from all 4 of the guns seized in Bramley, when confirmed hits were first recorded and subsequently updated and then updated again? Is that facility on the system?
That is correct, Commissioner. The system keeps a head stamp for any activity that takes place on the system.
So would you be able to give to the Commission then a timeline on the progress of hits on these 4 test cartridges related to these four weapons?
I will be able to do that if provided with time to do that, Commissioners. I will be able to do that.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. That would be very helpful.
And just below the date, 20 October 2025, there's Mthembu TJ. Do you see that?
That's correct. Yes, I see that, Commissioners.
Yes. What role or function would Mthembu TJ have played, if any?
He is one of our technicians who normally does the viewings on the match point. After the product, after the acquisition, there must be someone who does viewings. And he is one who does that final product of viewing to confirm if there are any possible hits, Commissioners.
And in this case, would he have been the person who printed out these images for inclusion in your statement?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Brigadier, if we can then go down to the line items under cartridge case exhibit details.
So, Mr. Chaskalson, maybe before you go to that, let me just ask one last question. Brigadier, the way it says event type, and you have illegal possession / sale, where does that kind of description of the event come from?
Commissioners, the system gives you a drop box with listed offenses, but it's not an exhaustive list. So the analyst will check the front page of the case file, what is the charge, and they will go and choose. If it's murder, they will go, the system will normally they use homicide, they will say homicide, will choose attempted murder. But you have a situation in some instances that, because the list is not exhaustive, some of the charges that are on the docket, you may find that you don't find on the list. And in some instances, in order for the process to proceed, maybe the analyst will just choose the one which is more relevant to that particular case.
If I can possibly clarify in this case, this is the Bramley case file, which relates to the arrest of the parties and the seizure of the weapons in their possession. Murder is not a charge in the Bramley case file. murder is a charge in the Vereniging case file. So I suspect that the Bramley case file, the primary charge is illegal possession of weapons, which may explain why the event type is flagged illegal possession.
I concur, Commissioners.
Can we then go down to the line items on cartridge case exhibit details? Exhibit number, can you just describe what that is?
Each exhibit is marked with a unique number, followed by the number which the exhibit is assigned to. We start with the lap number. So this particular cartridge case was marked with the Bramley lap number 193045/2024, capital letter AA10. As it was collected from the crime scene by the crime scene, the person who was processing the crime scene. It could be a member from LCRC, a local criminal record center. As they see the exhibit on the scene, they mark it, they give it a unique number of where they find it. They decide on the numbering. That numbering will be written in the covering letter. That specimen will be packaged, separate with that numbering, AA10. When it arrives at the lab, what the analyst will do will take an engraver and engrave the lab number of that case at the bottom of the cartridge case, followed by that unique number from the crime scene, which is AA10. That is the unique number of this cartridge case, Commissioners.
Then caliber, that speaks for itself. That's it's a 9mm parabellum. That's the caliber of the firearm that's from which the cartridge cases are discharged. Make?
Commissioner, at the back of the head stamp, each manufacturer, they write their manufacturer name. Say, for example, if it's PMP, which is Pretoria metal, they will write at the back of the head stamp PMP. So different manufacturers have got their own different head stamps in order to identify the ammunition. So such information is also recorded on the IB system, Commissioners.
Is that what we see on page 2 of the same annexure?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Then firing pin shape, that seems self-explanatory. Composition.
Commissioners, there's different material to manufacture cartridges. You've got brass, you've got nickel, you've got steel, so you must explain the material. So this is just to explain, this one in particular was made of brass, or is made of brass.
Then double cast composition, which has been left blank, what would sometimes be put there?
It's also related to the material, but in most instances, some of those fields that are additional, it doesn't harm if you don't complete them, if you don't have the information, Commissioners.
Then category, you have crime evidence. Maybe if you can illustrate what goes in there by comparing page 1 with page 2.
Commissioners, the IBC is a database. We acquire piece of evidence from crime scene, that is cartridge cases, bullets that are collected from crime scenes. We acquire them on the system. We also acquire tests that we test in the lab. We acquire them on the system. So when you acquire the system gives you option to choose. If you are acquiring a cartridge case that comes from the crime scene, you will choose crime scene evidence. If you acquire a test specimen, the system will ask you and you will choose a test. So that is why there's a difference between this field of category.
Then again, if you can explain what the category firearm exhibit refers to, and it may be useful again to compare the blank entry on 1 with the entry on 2.
If the commissioners can check the exhibit number on that page 2, it says 084 TC1. So, in short, the marking of, that is the marking of the test that the analyst would have used to shoot test with this particular firearm. The analyst, if the firearm has a serial number, the analyst will take the last 3 digits of the firearm, of the serial number. Say, for example, it's 27084. The analyst will take the 084 and add TC1. T means test cartridge 1. Normally we fire 2 tests. The second test will be 084 TC2. And he will engrave this number at the bottom of the cartridge case. So this is how the test was engraved for this particular firearm, commissioners.
So if I can just take that further, page 2 is a test cartridge. So
That's
it's
correct,
a test cartridge fired from a gun seized at a crime scene.
That is correct, commissioners.
Under firearm exhibit, you have a number for the gun that was seized. It's an exhibit number for the gun.
In other words, the firearm serial number was not erased, commissioners, yes.
Would the serial number of the gun be included as firearm exhibit? Under that line item, firearm exhibit, if you have the serial number, would you ordinarily include it there? Because if I look at the other exhibits relating to the other weapons, everything is recorded as gun 1, gun 2, gun 3. There are no serial numbers recorded in relation to the line item firearm exhibit.
You will include the serial number, commissioners.
Now, because it's a test cartridge, you know which gun it was fired from, so you can enter something under firearm exhibit. That's correct?
That's correct, commissioners.
Whereas, because the cartridge found on the crime scene was just found on the crime scene, you can't, at this stage, enter any details in relation to firearm exhibit because you don't know which firearm it was fired from. We have no conclusive proof that it
That is correct, commissioners.
Occurrence again would be the date 30th of April 2024 when the crime took place. What does the reception line item refer to?
Again, commissioners, some of the fields that are there, which are not compulsory, commissioners.
We've then got creation dates. It says created by Modise AS. And there is a modification a few minutes later. And it says last acquisition also a few minutes later. What do those modification and last acquisition dates refer to?
When the acquisition process starts, it records the time, and when the process finishes, it records the time. Then the analyst must now instruct the system to release the specimens. So all those processes are recorded, Commissioners.
What is BF class characteristic?
Again, it's some of the fields that are not compulsory but are there on the system, Commissioners.
And then finally, there are dimensions for the firing pin outline. Sorry, what does BF start for? BF inner outline, BF outer outline?
This is the dimension that the system automatically gives to the diameter of the back of the cartridge case, Commissioners. So those fields are automatically filled by the system, Commissioners.
And do you know what BF stands for?
Commissioner, out of now, I cannot conclusively say what it does. What does it stand for, Commissioner? BF.
Thank you, Brigadier. This it was a long diversion from paragraph 17.1 of your statement. So let's get back to 17.2. We've dealt with image capture and acquisition. Next stage is database storage. Can you just describe what happens there?
Commissioner, once the acquisition of the specimens is completed, the next phase is the database storage. In other words, the digital images and associated data are stored in a central database, and the system can store hundreds and thousands of pieces of evidence.
Then the third stage, automated comparison.
That's where now, once everything has been stored, the system starts to compare now, to look for similarities. The system uses advanced mathematical algorithms to check if there are any similarities. In other words, it runs the specimen which was acquired recently with specimens which were previously acquired on the system. It runs it back and forth to check if there's any similarities. You can refer this as a internet or Google engine search, where when you go on the system, you want to find out a particular make and model of a vehicle, you enter the particulars. This is the process where the system does that now. So it compares now, and similar as the internet engine search, Commissioners.
And how long after acquisition would the system take to complete its process of automated comparison?
Commissioner, if the network is stable, this process can take 5 to 24 hours.
But it's a process that the system does.
That's correct, Commissioners.
It doesn't, and it's a process that is not at this stage 100% accurate. It's putting forward to you, or the system is identifying a range of, shall we say, potential hits.
That is correct, Commissioners.
So at some stage, an analyst is now going to have to come back and sit in front of a monitor and call up this case file and go through the potential hits to see which of these potential hits graduate to the status of likely hits or hits that should be confirmed manually by microscopic analysis.
That is correct, Commissioner. That is a process which we called viewings. In other words, that's a process where the operator will come and sit in front of the system and view all the candidates that the system has identified as possible hits. And if he's satisfied that there are similarities indeed, then he will make a printout of those images and then request the physical specimens in a form of case file, which are filed in the case files, for them to be compared manually through a comparison microscope.
So so there are two further stages. You've got the expert who then sits in front of the screen looking at the potential hits and identifying which ones look good to him or her. That would be 17.4.
That is correct, Commissioners.
And then you've got 17.5, which is experts now sat in front of the screen. The screen is given 40 potential hits. The expert has said 25 of these look really good. I want to requisition the original exhibits for each of these 25. That's the process that you describe in 17.5.
That is correct, Commissioners.
And then the last stage of the process is the original exhibits then come in, and a different expert sits in front of a microscope with the original test cartridge from the case file in one microscope and the 25 requisitioned exhibits one after another in the other microscope.
That is correct, Commissioners.
Can you explain to the Commissioner how resource constraints delay this process? So you started at 17.3, and you, Ms. Poy has gone ahead of me and is putting up your backlogs and your personnel figures yet, but we'll deal with them even later. But for now, what I want to understand, or I want you to explain to the Commission, is there are several stages in this process. A ballistics examiner has finished the first manual examination and test firing process in the forensic lab, has signed off on a report. That report comes to ABIS. The first stage in ABIS is going to be image capture, and that you deal with in 17.1. You need an analyst to be available to do that image capture. How long does it take ordinarily between the moment that the case file arrives at the ABIS section to the point at which an analyst is able to enter those exhibits and acquire them in the ABIS system?
Commissioner, because the case upon completion by a ballistic analyst must go through the administration process where a new IBIS lab number must be generated. And after that, that case must be assigned to an analyst before it could be acquired on the IBIS system. So during that process, due to the number of cases that we received and the limited resources, it may take around 3 months before you are able to acquire that specific case under normal circumstances, because the cases must queue. And as they queue, they go through the process that I've mentioned. Lab numbers are generated. At some point, they are assigned to the operators. The operators acquire them. They must go back to be reviewed in order to be finalized on the system. So it goes through that process. So in any event, it's a process that is dependent on the resources that you have at your disposal, Commissioners.
Now, how many acquisition terminals do you have at your office? Those machines that will take the high-density image photographs of cartridges?
Commissioners, we have 8 brass tracks. The brass tracks are cartridge cases stations. We acquire cartridge case on them with 8 of them. And then We have got 3 bullet tracks where we acquire bullets.
Slow down. Let's deal with the brass tracks first. So maybe I interrupted too soon. So you've got 3 bullet tracks, bullet photographing machines,
Yes.
and 8 cartridge photographing machines.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Do you have a complement of analysts that are able to operate those machines on a full-time basis?
Commissioner, for the longest time, we never had that luxury to have a complement staff to body, what I can call warm bodies to sit in front of those machines. With the current strength now, we are not able to operate all the existing machines.
How many machines are you able to operate with your staff at the moment?
Commissioners, as I've said, we've got 8 brass tracks. At a particular time, you may find out that there's only 4 that are fully occupied.
How much do you have to pay in terms of license fees for the system?
Commissioners, we call that the service level agreement. We pay a monthly fee of over 3.8 million per month for the maintenance of the system, Commissioners.
So you're paying a monthly fee of 3.8 million a month, but you can really only use half the capacity of that system because you only can operate 4 of the 8 input centers with your current staff.
As it will be outlined later with the figures, unfortunately, that is the reality, Commissioners.
And you earlier said that because of the staff shortages, it may take 3 months before the ballistics file, from when the ballistics file arrives at your offices to the point at which the first image is taken of the cartridges in the ballistic file.
Yes, that is correct, Commissioner. And I must add, we are only talking about the first phase.
That's what I wanted to get to next. So let's talk about the second phase. We've now spent maybe 3 months after the file arrives, and the cartridges have been digitally acquired in the system. 24 hours later, the system has decided that there are maybe 40 other crimes around the country to which these digital images are linked. But you need an analyst to sit in front of a different screen now and to call up each one of the 40 images in the system to see how accurate those potential matches are. How many analysts have you got to do that process?
Commissioners, I've got 8 match point stations, but so far only have 3 full-time analysts that can do the viewings. And sometimes I give them other tasks, for example, to assist with statistics, but they are full-time, there are 3. So in other words, 5 of the mesh point are not occupied. And
Sorry, can you just, I just want to be clear that I understood what your answer was. You've got 8 workstations where these matches can be verified on screen, but you only have 3 analysts who can do that process, who are trained and at your disposal to do that process, apart from the fact that you may need them to do other things as well.
That is correct, Commissioner. And if I may add, because of the complications on the viewings, it requires that the person must spend 8 hours watching the screen, so they become exhausted. It becomes exhausting. They can only view around 200 images per day, and yet you've got over 28,000 that needs to be viewed. And per day they can only view about 200, and there are only 3. So that tells you the extent of the challenges in terms of in terms of human resource that we are faced with, commissioners.
But again, going back to the layout that SAPS, or the expenditure that SAPS incurs on the system gives you 8 viewing stations. As part of an overall package, you're paying, I forget the figure, was it 3.6 million a month?
3.8 million.
3.8 million a month. But you can only utilize 3 of the workstations because of your staffing restraints. What does that mean in terms of further delays? It's taken us 3 months from the point at which the ballistics file arrives at your section to the point at which the ballistics are acquired. What's the delay between acquisition of the ballistics and expert review of the comparisons that the system has thrown up one day after that, the first 3 months?
Commissioners, in terms of age analysis of unviewed images, you may find out we have got images that are on the system not being viewed for more than a year. I'm speaking under correction, but it's quite a lengthy period. Ideally, you want to have this process on as it happens, but it's not possible because of this lack of human resource to carry out the functions, commissioners.
And can I just clarify in relation to the lack of human resources? Clearly, there's an obvious shortage of at least 5 additional analysts because you've got 8 workstations and only 3 people to view. But you mentioned earlier that there are problems with people staring at a screen for 8 hours in a day, and you could only do about 2, each person could only do about 200, I think you said. In terms of best practice for the system, do you need more than 1 analyst per workstation? I mean, should people be doing this on a rotational basis, or is it, is it 1 analyst per workstation?
With the level of experience that the analysts have now, you would prefer to have 1 analyst dedicated to a working station, and the other working stations also additional analysts dedicated to those working station, commissioners.
So to get maximal use of the system, you would need another 5 analysts 5 trained analysts to be doing the viewing, the expert review on the system.
Commissioner, if we want to achieve the real-time viewings, we'll need additional members, yes, commissioners.
So that was the next stage. And
just before that, and Brigadier, if you say you would have to have more, does that mean that the more would then work on the same workstations? Where exactly would the more be fitted in?
Commissioner, I've indicated the figures of the equipment that we have.
Yes.
And in terms of the figures of the human resource that we have, we are not able to occupy all the working stations.
Yes, I heard that, yeah. But you see, here's what I have in my mind. You say there's the problem that out of the 28,000 that is generated, an analyst can only look at 2. That to me means that even if you were to have enough analysts for each one of the workstations, which I understand to be 1 analyst, 1 analyst, 1 analyst for all of them. So you are covered in terms of analyst 2 workstation. That would not address the problem of being able to see only 200 or to view only 200 out of 28,000. Do you follow me?
I follow.
So how can that be addressed? Let's assume that there is an analyst per machine, so you are not running short in terms of the workstations. But how would that 200, only 200 out of 28,000, how would or could that be addressed?
Commissioners, the 200 that I mentioned is just the norm so that we can be able to measure the performance. But there's no hard and fast rule that they must view 200, for example, because in some instances you find out some results are easy to eliminate immediately. But this is the minimum that for you to meet your target, you must view this minimum. But there's no hard and fast rule. Sometimes you can view more, but in some instances we rely on overtime. So when there's overtime, they view even more. But
let's say they do their best, their utmost, work overtime, but what do you think is the maximum that's humanly possible to get anywhere near 28,000?
Commissioners, if the person is dedicated only to that process, we can be able to get maximum production, adding overtime, maybe even 500 and more. The only challenge is that, like I've indicated, they are multitasked. They perform other duties as well. They are not only concentrating on that process only. And again, the first process is not stopping. It's a conveyor belt. It's continuing. So whatever they view, there's more additions coming in as well.
Yes. And 500 is still a drop in the ocean if we're looking at 28,000. Okay. Now, why have more workstations then if there are these practical difficulties? What are the extra workstations for?
When we acquired the system, we looked into the capacity because our aim was that we must be able to work on real time. As a crime occurs, we must be able to acquire the specimen, run it on the system. So, therefore, we wanted to have that number of workstations with a certain number of analysts that can work on the stations. But naturally, with time, other members resign or they go for greener pastures, they leave, we don't replace them. So eventually, we end up in this environment where we are, where we have so limited members that can work on the system. In some, for example, in Port Elizabeth, I think they are only left with 3 members that are working at IBIS, and they are doing everything, just the only 3 of them.
Do I understand your response to mean that at some point you did have enough numbers per workstation, but that the numbers dwindled with time?
That is correct, Commissioners.
And you are stuck with having to pay 3.8 million per month for the extra workstations?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Is that because of the contract? You cannot get out of that. It just has to be that way.
It's contract. It's contract, Commissioner.
So you're stuck with it. All right, let me see. Thank you.
We've reached the end of stage 2 now, the expert review. And we've discussed the difficulties of resource constraints and the delays that causes. But once your expert has now viewed the images online and has said...
I'm very, very sorry. There was another question I already had in mind, but because I asked a few, I forgot. My apologies, Mr. Shaskatsen. Seeing that at what I would call the end points, there's the point at which there's human involvement, and once the comparisons have been made, the analyst then calls for the original exhibits themselves. So there's human intervention there. And then finally also there's human intervention once the exhibits have arrived. The analyst again is involved at that stage, and I think in terms of paragraph 17.6 of your statement. That is the last stage, as it were. Again, as I say, human involvement. So at 2 stages of the process. Is the process at the 2 stages where there's human involvement not susceptible to manipulation? I know you can always go back to what the machine itself generated and establish what the true position is, but still, isn't there susceptibility to manipulation at the stages where human beings now do something and make their own reports based on what they saw in terms of what was generated by the workstation?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Commissioner. I'll start with the second stage, the phase 2, where the intervention of human beings is required to view. You need integrity, because I can run through the system and say I've viewed them and marked them viewed. So you need integrity there. If the person does and mark them viewed, from the management point of view, because we check those things, we'll start to check. I mean, we are no longer generating possible hits. What could be the problem? Then when we go back. Fortunately, the system has got checks and balances. For example, if I've marked something as viewed today, because it's a continuous comparison, it will come back again, even if I marked it. So it's not all lost. But human beings, that's why you need someone with integrity. That's why we don't give them too much work, because I can go there and mark the whole 28,000 viewed, and without any possible hits. No one will know. With the second one, the last phase, that one goes back, is similar to ballistics now, because now you have the specimens, physical specimen that you must now take to the comparison microscope and compare them. There, after you have completed your results, someone must come and verify your findings. So there's checks and balances in that regard.
Unless the two, or unless both of them are involved in the manipulation. But no, I get the information.
Mr. Cheskasen, sir, is it on the same?
It was actually to say, should we have tea?
That I will not argue with.
Let's adjourn and resume at 11:15.
1, 2. We are ready to resume. Cell phones off, please. Thank you.
On the system. That's why we call them cold hits.
I think my question, maybe let me clarify it a bit, is have you ever had a full complement of staff to be able to optimally utilize the stations that you have?
Yes, Commissioner, at the beginning we were able. But what we have realized as well is that crime is increasing.
Yes.
Because from time to time we have noticed now we are receiving more than we can process.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's fair to say it's not just a function of you're not getting the right number of people. There's also now the extra burden that crime is increasing. I think it's one trying to understand where is the problem that causes what you've described in terms of shortage of resources and these poor turnaround times.
That is a correct, Commissioner. It's a variety of things, but amongst them is that we don't have sufficient members.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cheskalson.
Mr. Cheskalson, just before you leave this section, in paragraph 17.5 of the statement, Brigadier, I just wanted clarity for my benefit. The digital match you are referring to here, is it between the cartridges that were recovered and brought to the laboratory and others that were found in other scenes, or is the match between the test cartridge and the cartridge that was recovered? I just need that clarity. What is the match between?
Commissioners, is a match between specimens or cartridge keys that were on the database. Now the system is comparing those with the new one just acquired. Yes.
Again, just before that, Mr. Cheskalson, this 500 is against 28,000. I've been agonizing over it in my mind. I'm trying to think, for example, first maybe
But the power of the system is such that even with one of the biggest, second biggest database in the world, your matches get generated by the system within 24 hours. So the system can move through that database within 24 hours.
That is correct, Commissioners.
So the bottlenecks are caused not by the system, but by the inability to deploy sufficient human resources to take advantage of the power of the system.
You have captured it correctly, Commissioner.
We've dealt with two of the bottlenecks. The bottleneck between between arrival of the file at ABIS and initial acquisition on the system. Then the second bottleneck between acquisition on the system and expert review in front of a screen of the system. The third stage is we've had our expert reviewing, and the expert has identified hits on the system that the expert believes to be good hits. And there's now to be a non-digital, a manual microscopic analysis of these various hits. How long does it take between the point at which the expert has requisitioned the real exhibits to the point at which you have another expert available in front of a microscope to look at those exhibits? What sort of delay is there between stages 2 and 3?
Thank you, Commissioners. Again, depending on the rate at which possible hits are generated, because there's a lot. Once generated, the actual case file must be retrieved, and an additional lab number must be registered for that specific case before it can be assigned to the analyst. That process requires that some case files are old. You must first wait for them to be retrieved from the archives before you can start to assign them. Again, there's only 3 officers that are assigned to confirm those possible hits physically in the on the comparison microscope. So if there are only 3 and you find one case might have linkages to multiple crime scenes, it means you must retrieve all those case files. Say, for example, you find one case which has more than 10 or 20 multiple hits that you need to compare with. You'll have to take all those case files, open each seal bag, view them on the microscope until you are satisfied that indeed you have a positive hit. So in that area alone as well, you also have over, depending on each lab, you also have a backlog of those printouts that are possible hits, where you need to retrieve all the case files to prepare them, to assign them to an analyst. You also have cases, you also have backlog in that area. I normally call that last stage a cherry on top, because an analyst feels excited when you see that the hits that you have identified has been confirmed as positive. It gives you that pleasure that at least a crime will be resolved. The investigating officer will know that this case that has been troubling me is linked to this other case which I was not aware of. Maybe the suspect might also have been arrested in that case, which may resolve the case. So if that process is not happening in real time, it's also not good. And that is where we are as well, Commissioners.
And Brigadier, how much of the delay between stages 2 and 3 has to do with practical reality? You have to find exhibits from archives and processes like that, which one has to live with. And how much of it deals with human resource constraints? You say you have 3 analysts to sit in front of the microscopes. how much of the delay is due to the fact that you have only 3 microscopes, and how much could you speed things up? 3 analysts to do the microscopic examinations. How much more quickly could it go if you had more analysts?
Commissioner, that is a problem, because those 3 officers that I've mentioned, they are not only there to do the confirmation, they are also team leaders. They manage members under them, day-to-day management of members. So in addition to their duties, they must confirm these possible hits. And if I'm saying there are 3, at the most, you'll find out they don't have enough time to spend only on those cases, because they are multitasked as well. So it has to do with human resource, Commissioner. And that's why you may find out you have cases that were identified maybe more than 12 months not being confirmed, because you can't reach to those cases as you like to.
So did I understand you correctly? You're saying that the system has generated hits, the reviewer has confirmed on the screen that these are likely hits and that they need microscopic analysis, and there might still be a delay of 12 months before you have an analyst who can get to the microscope.
That is correct, Commissioners.
Brigadier, have you done an analysis of what your staff shortages are? In an ideal world, what would the staff complement of your office and the other ABIS offices around the country look like?
Commissioner, I've done that. I've done that exercise in consultation with the provincial regional commanders. I've got an idea in terms of our ideal and the current. In order for us to be able to be fully staffed, I've got the figures that I've worked on, Commissioners.
Do you have them available for us, or could you, I mean, if you don't have them readily available for us, could you give us a table of what your current complement is, what your shortages are?
Commissioner, I have rough notes where I worked on. I can give the figures, and this is only for IBIS, not ballistics. I can give the figures if it pleases the Commission.
It would be, I think it would be valuable for us.
Commissioner, I'll start it first by the current. What do we have in each regions, and what is the shortage, and what is the ideal? At head office here in Pretoria, Commissioners, we have got 16 IBIS operators at the moment.
Sorry, Brigadier, might I ask if we now go back to paragraph 8, because it may be useful to break it down. So paragraph 8, you've got just a sort of fairly bland table about the regional spread of ballistics analysts. Maybe if you could break up that 58 figure in head office into, actually take a note, as you said, how many analysts that you had, I think, at acquisition stage. But can you do those figures, and then we'll annotate them with reference to these figures in paragraph 8?
Well, first I must just mention that those figures that are there, they include ballistics analyst and IBIS analyst, and they don't include the support staff. It's only members that are actively involved in case analysis between both IBIS and IBIS, the figures on the board. And we also excluded the mechanical, because we don't have a problem with mechanical subsection. Right. And the one that I have on my notes is now only IBIS, where I have the current, the ideal, and the shortage.
Can you give us those figures?
In Pretoria, which we called HQ, we've got 16 IBIS analysts. The shortage, according to the number of machines and the work volume, is 14. Ideally, you must have 30 in order for you to be able to get to all the work. In the KZN, you have got 7 IBIS analysts currently. The shortage, according to the volume, the machines that they have is 7. Ideally, you need to have 14. In the Western Cape, they have got 7 IBIS analysts. Ideally, the shortage is 7. Ideally, they're supposed to be 14. In the Eastern Cape, there are currently 3. Their shortage is 5. Total, they're supposed to have 8, which is an ideal. So you need a total of 66 IBIS analysts nationally to be able to run the equipment optimally in real time. In other words, we have got a shortage of 33. You have 33. You are operating with half shortage currently.
And you could accommodate those additional 33 without having to buy any extra licenses, any extra hardware. Your existing contract would cover them.
That is correct, Commissioners.
Now, I want to put a scenario to you. You've been describing bottlenecks at those 3 different stages that cause delays, certainly in excess of a year, between when the initial ballistics examination, ballistics analysis takes place and when the system generates a hit that can be communicated to the investigating officers. If we jump ahead to an infographic that we'll get to later. It's on page 14 of your annexure file. And I must emphasize here, before we describe this infographic, you'll see the one on the screen has all sorts of redactions on it. That's because it concerns a number of cases which haven't yet been brought to court and are still, and the investigating officers are still gathering evidence, and they've asked us not to identify the specifics of the cases so that the suspects, other than the shooters, don't know that the ballistics confirmations have taken place. So I don't want you to mention any of the names of the cases, but let's just look at these cases. And the ones that are, these are the cases that have been linked to to 4 of the guns seized in Bramley. There's a 5th gun that comes from elsewhere. But what we see is more than 20 different cases. I think you even address it in your report. We see that 24 different cases were linked to the guns seized at Bramley at the time that this infographic was prepared. We saw, I think on Annexure M1, that by October it was now 29 cases. What that means is that 24 at the time of this infographic, 29 by last week, 29 different investigations had been proceeding in parallel with one another. Without the investigating officers in each one of those 29 knowing that the weapons used in their case were the same as the weapons used in 29 or 28 other different cases. And so you have detectives in one part of the country operating in isolation there, detectives in another part of the country running their investigations. If they speak to each other, suddenly, and they start pooling all of their information, Suddenly all of their investigations proceed at a much, much quicker rate. Some of them may even be tied up immediately. If your system operates with delays of more than a year because of staff shortages, the real cost of that is that you have these investigations all over the country where detectives are essentially working in the dark with reference to very important information about their cases. And a whole lot of wasted investigative time is being spent, which would be saved if the information in your system could be made available in a real-time basis. Am I missing anything in that proposition?
Commissioner, that is the real essence. That is our concern. And that is what we want to see being resolved. Because we have the capability to assist investigating officers out there to resolve their cases speedily so that they don't operate in silos. And the only solution to that is this system. But for you to be able to optimally utilize that system, you need to operate it on real time.
Just accepting that answer, perhaps also to put this proposition for your comment. The chairperson earlier spoke about the integrity of the human involvement in this process. Now, in this case, we've had evidence that I think it's Brigadier Makhotlwe, that he had not linked the casings, and the reason that the investigators decided to have another lab, your sister lab, look at this is because he had mentioned in a conversation that he's found other linkages. So and yet it wasn't in his report. That suggests that the human element is also important to achieve what Mr. Chaskalson is putting to you, that the linkages would have been established and the investigators would not have been working in silos, not aware that their cases are linked. I think the simple proposition I'm making is there is also an element of the integrity of your experts as well.
Thanks, Commissioner. If I can address that specifics in terms of timelines. My analogy is that in terms of the timelines when that conversation, the supposed conversation took place, it was around 2024, around October month. And the objective evidence that we have regarding IBIS is that the specific specimens was only acquired on the IBIS system on the 6th of September. So it was acquired after the conversation have taken place. And it has, again, to go through the process where it was viewed, which was in 2025. So if that conversation took place, whatever the member says to the investigating officer by then is neither here nor there, because he wouldn't have known at that point that there are these more than 24 linkages that IBIS has produced. The work had not yet started at IBIS when that conversation took place, commissioners. I submit.
Brigadier, we will go through that in detail because I think the timeline is important, and there is another important conclusion that I want to highlight for the Commission, which is that if that knowledge wasn't available in the IBIS system at the time, and yet it appears to have been communicated, it must have come from outside the IBIS system, which has its own implications. But we will go in detail through that timeline because, as the Brigadier says, at the time that the original conversation took place, or allegedly took place, which was May, and we know that some conversation had taken place because the letter of the prosecutor requesting additional protection for the detectives referred to that conversation and referred to it in August. When the prosecutor referred to that conversation in August, nothing had been entered in the IBIS system yet. So whoever communicated that to the detectives got that information from outside the IBIS system, not from inside the IBIS system. There was nothing in the IBIS system at that stage. But we will go step by step to show that.
I think the simple proposition that I was making was that even in that ideal turnaround time, that assuming you had all the resources and all the necessary stations, and you're achieving your ideal turnaround times, which has the effect that Mr. Chaskalson is proposing to you, it's still the human element, the integrity of the individuals or the people that your experts who interact with the system in real time is still a factor, would still be a factor. I think that's what I'm testing.
Although our processes are demarcated, if we're speaking of a ballistic analyst has a role where it comes and ends, and then the role of IBIS takes over. So if a ballistics has examined the case or analyzed the case and issued a 2-2 statement, he hands over to IBIS. His role is done. He wouldn't know what happened thereafter. Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
The second proposition that I wanted to put to you is that your IBIS system is of particular value in relation to organized crime. And I want to put that proposition to you on this basis, that if you have a random murder, someone gets into a fight, pulls out a gun and shoots somebody, chances are that usually that weapon is not going to be linked to another crime. Maybe, but in most cases I would imagine it is not. Is that, and maybe you could, if you think that something that I'm putting to you on this basis is wrong, just stop me as I put it. And then let me continue. If you're dealing with organized crime, taxi violence, political killings, criminal gang-related matters, there I would imagine that the incidence of the same gun being linked to several crimes is much higher.
Commissioner, we have seen that with taxi violence, the CIT, cash in transit, what they called is in Kabi, the hire for murders, the gangs. You'll find that there's one particular firearm that you see terrorizing a particular area. For example, you'll see the areas of Ivory Park, Tembisa. You'll see this particular firearm which has generated multiple hits, but the firearm is not recovered. We see that. And that tells you that there's one person who's actually terrorizing the area. You see that in areas like Harankua, in areas like when you go to the northern part of Port Elizabeth, in the gang-infested area in the Western Cape, you will find out there's this particular firearm that is going around, and IBIS is able to generate those intelligence to show that there's a firearm. So yes, it happens, and we have that experience that in terms of your taxi violence, CIT, either one of our suspicions was that, especially with CIT, was that maybe there's someone who is hiring the same firearm to different gangs, because you'll find that firearm, especially AK-47, you'll find one AK-47 that always appears in many multiple cases, but is never recovered. Now you ask yourself, is it still the same group, or is it hired to different groups? But we have a lot of those kind of cases, commissioners.
Because what my proposition to you is that where you have SAPs investigating those sorts of organized crime situations, the need for real-time ballistics evidence is at its highest. And so, if the system as itself is currently not functioning in a way that can generate real-time results, then you need one of two solutions. Either you need to provide dedicated ABIS and ballistics access and capacity to the task teams or investigation teams dealing with those sorts of crimes, like was the case in the PKTT, where they had dedicated ballistics capacity assigned to them. Or you need to have a system that will fast track their requests within your existing system. Because it's those kinds of investigations in respect of which instant ballistics results are so important. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I have a comment, Commissioners. I would say we need to capacitate so that you can be able to deal with the requests as they come. Not necessarily to deploy your resources to work with the task teams. Because at the end of the day, you need to maintain the independence of your analyst so that they don't become contaminated by working with the investigators and discussing the cases with the investigators. So if the lab is capacitated enough, it will be able to provide the much needed assistance to whoever organized unit, task team, whatever. You will be able to provide that services, but not necessarily to be part of that establishment. That is my take on that one, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Before you continue, Mr. Shaskalson, you, Brigadier, you gave us figures on the current numbers and shortages insofar as human resources or the human resource section of the ABIS is concerned. Have you done a similar exercise with regard to the ballistics analysis subsection?
Commissioner, I've done it, and when the Commissioner mentioned that the figures are there, but that is actually one area that keeps me awake at night. Commissioner, the figure speaks for themselves. I always say if anyone wants to appreciate the level of high crime involving firearms in South Africa, one must just visit my strong room where I keep exhibits. Then one will appreciate that we are living in a dangerous country. Commissioner, at any given point, I have more than 29,000 firearms, and each of those firearms, a victim has been killed. And I only have 42 analysts to handle that volume of work. My case manager commander approaches me not long to take me to the case, to the strong safe, to show me that, Brigadier, I have now run out of space to put my exhibits. I don't know where to put them anymore. I'm putting them in a bin because I can't file them. When I started with ballistic, we had one safe. Currently, we had to repurpose a museum to make it a safe. It's now full as we speak. We don't have space anymore. Like I said, we receive more than what we can process, Commissioners. So only Pretoria, 42 analysts. Those 42 analysts, they must take leave, study leave, sick leave. They must go to court, they must go for consultation. So you can imagine, Commissioner. So that is one area, Commissioner, that is giving me sleepless nights. I can only submit, Commissioner.
take it that most of those firearms that are in storage are unlicensed.
It's a variety, Commissioner, but the fact of the matter is are there because a crime has been committed. All of them, they've got case numbers, be it as attempted murder, but the majority of them are cases where someone has been killed and they need to be speedily worked. If you check on the board there, if I have 450 cases that were registered in 2022, it's now more than 3 years. That case is in court. Now one can imagine what happened to the case. It has been postponed every day because of an outstanding ballistic report. And as a result, some of the courts are now relying on the Section 342, capital letter A of Criminal Procedure Act inquiry. They send you those inquiry to come and explain why is the delay in obtaining a ballistic report. And IO calls you, says, my case has been remanded for the last time. And now you must now jump the queue. You must jump those cases that were registered in 2022 and 2023 and address this recent case. If you don't do that, the court will issue a warrant of your arrest because they need you to go and explain why the case is old. And when I remark on this one, Commissioners, there's an incident where the former commander of ballistics was arrested on his last day of service, on his birthday. He was handcuffed in our presence because of contempt of court. He could not attend the Section 342A inquiry in Stilfontein in the Northwest. They put him at the back of the car, handcuffed to Stilfontein on a Friday afternoon when his friends had booked him a surprise present at somewhere in Delstrom to go and celebrate. That has to be postponed. We had to see to it that he is released on that Friday afternoon. And that is what we are facing on a day-to-day basis. Instead of me preparing the cases, I must travel to court and explain why the case is delayed. Out of maybe 70% of cases that we complete per month, more than 70% of them are urgent requests from court. So when that happened to our colleagues, we were in tears, literally. And that is what we are facing with on a daily basis, Commissioners.
Brigadier, maybe you could take us through paragraphs 9 and 10 at this point. I was going to deal with all of this at the end, but we've actually dealt with it now. So can you just explain these figures in paragraph 9 and then in paragraph 10?
Commissioners, I always draw statistics on a daily basis to see where we stand with our performance, with our production. So paragraph 9 is a depiction of our cases that were registered and still to be analyzed as of the 17th of October 2025. I've given the age analysis of those cases. As you can see, the head office, which is Pretoria, we are servicing 6 provinces. That's why our case volume is high. We are servicing Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Northwest, Northern Cape, and Gauteng, and Free State. We have 29,000 cases that needs to be analyzed. And from these 29,000, in terms of age analysis, we've got 450 which were registered in 2022. They still need to be analyzed. We've got over 6,000 cases that were registered in 2023. They still need to be analyzed. We've got over 11,900 cases that were registered in 2024. They must still be analyzed. 2025 alone, we are already over 10,000 cases that still need to be analyzed. The same goes with KZN and Western Cape. What I've noticed now, Commissioners, KZN used to be the second highest in terms of the number of cases. But I see now Western Cape is starting to overtake the Western Cape, the KZN. And it makes sense when you watch on the news, there's always firearms that are recovered, multiple firearms in the Western Cape. Now you can see Western Cape has got over 5,000 cases that still need to be analyzed. Eastern Cape, they are quite a small office, but it's also a busy province. They've got over 2.5 cases that needs to be analyzed. When you add everything nationally, we have got over 41,000 cases, but that number fluctuates. If we check today, it's even more now because we normally rely on overtime. My office alone, per financially, we get around 4 million overtime. This is the last month, we have already depleted that overtime. And that is the money that assists us at least to reach to the urgent request. So now we must wait for the next financial year to be able to see how much will be allocated. So without overtime now, we are just going to rely, I don't know, on our members, how we can push them. We are pushing them. So that is the reality, Commissioners, in terms of paragraph 9. It is that cases that are not yet analyzed. They still need to be analyzed. And some of them, depending on the volume. One thing that we have noticed now, I don't know whether it's a trend, maybe, especially with CITs. I've noticed that maybe it's easy nowadays to procure ammunition. Because in one scene of a CIT, you may find that you collect over 100 cartridge cases on the scene. And it happens a lot. So it takes a while to analyze those multiple exhibits. Maybe the criminals these days, in the olden days, you'll find one cartridge case of AK-47 and the other calibers. But these days, maybe it is easy for criminals to acquire ammunition because they don't spare them, they use them, they make sure. And that creates too much work for us because now it takes longer for an analyst to finish a case if it has got multiple exhibits. The second table, Commissioners, is the IBIS work that I explained earlier on. The figures here include the two last phases that I've mentioned, phase 2 where we view the images, and the last phase, phase 3, where we must confirm the possible hits. In Pretoria alone, we have got over 38,000 cases that...
Sorry, Brigitte, can I just clarify that? So are you saying that the figure in Pretoria, 38,343, that reflects cases that have already been acquired in the ABIS system, but haven't yet been reviewed or confirmed?
That's correct, not being viewed and confirmed. Yes, Commissioners, there's two figures.
And is this just, is this 38,000, is this 38,000 cases or 38,000 entries, or is it 38,000 possible hits that have been generated by the system?
Commissioner, I have a breakdown, but I just mixed them. I know we have got over 22,000, those that needs to be viewed. Then the remainder is those that have been viewed, they still need to be confirmed. So I added them together. So in Pretoria is 38,000, KZN is 35,000, Western Cape is 21,000, Eastern Cape is over 13,000. That gives you a total of over 108,000 cases that IBIS still has to work on.
This disproportionality or disproportionate numbers you've got between head office, which you say is 6 provinces, and then you have KZN, which seems to be seriously disproportionate. Is that a staffing issue? Is that a machine issue? Or is it just a crime issue?
Commissioner, it's the crime issue. If you check a province like KZN, largely there's many firearms in that province. And if you check Gauteng, it's Gauteng, and maybe Mpumalanga contributes a lot with the rhino pouching. It also contributes a lot. So it's the crime patterns.
But sorry, Brigadier, can I take you up on that? Because it seems to me that if If it was simply an issue of crime as opposed to staffing, you would see similar proportions in the ballistics table in paragraph 9. But it does seem that the ballistics section of KZN, roughly, the ballistics side of KZN is approximately a sixth as its number of outstanding investigators, approximately a sixth of those in Gauteng. It's just under 5,000 versus just under 30,000. Whereas if you look at the ABIS side, the ABIS backlog in KZN is just under that of head office in Gauteng. You've got 38,000 in head office, 35,000 in KZN, which suggests that the ABIS system in KZN is not processing cases at the same rate as the ABIS system in head office. And you do point out that ABIS in KZN is operating at a 50% staff complement. Head office is slightly better resourced. It's 16 out of 30 rather than 7 out of 14. But it does seem to me that there's a particular need for ABIS resources, well, across the board, but a disproportionate need in those other three provinces.
It is correct, Council, especially in KZN. We had this problem of capacity for quite some time. At some point, they were even utilizing some ballistic analysts to confirm their possible hits because they did not have anyone to do that part of the work. And therefore, it's not surprising that they are second after head office in terms of the backlog in that area.
And what that means is this incredibly powerful system that let me take a step back. If we look at where the real backlogs are, with the ABIS numbers at 108,000 versus the ballistic section at 41,000, what that's reflecting is you have an incredibly powerful system that you can't take advantage of. Because of all of these backlogs. You've got 108,000 possible hits that, if confirmed, will advance investigations on the ground significantly. But they're outstanding because you don't have the resources to maximize your use of the system.
Commissioner, it's a very painful reality that we're faced with. I take note of the observation. Yes, Council, it's painful, we know.
Dear, maybe lastly, on this topic, at least from me, what is it a function of? Is it that you're unable to attract people? Is it because you have been told not to recruit? What in fact explains your lack of the necessary human resources?
Commissioner, it's a mix of issues. For example, in the last recruitment, we were given a number of, for example, Pretoria, we were given about 8 posts which were advertised. But due to some red tapes in the system, we end up only appointing one person. And as a result, posts are withdrawn. And that does not consider the impact on those environments. So if we have 8 posts that are advertised, and because of the process, then you end up not appointing those 8, it's a lost opportunity. It's definitely a lost opportunity because for that process to restart again in government, things take long. So you are not able to replace your members as they resign or they go to other areas. You are not able to replace them because in some instances, you are being disadvantaged by some of those red tapes. Like I'm making an example of these 8 posts that I could not fill. And those were posts which we urgently need, but we were not able to fill them. We only had 1 analyst from those. So those are some of the things, commissioners.
And when you speak of red tapes, such as what? And I ask Brigadier because it's a topic that we are spending a bit of time on, and so it's clear that it has some significance.
To be specific on this one, commissioners, there were queries regarding the requirements on the advert, that the advert was too vague, it excluded certain individuals, and as a result, there was no appetite to proceed. Some were saying we'll be challenged if we proceed to appoint. So those are things that, in my view, are low-hanging fruits, that if you do your work diligently, you will be able to avoid those kind of things. For me, those are elementary, but those are the things that eventually end up having posts being withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Chescos.
Can I ask, Brigadier, as you, those figures that you gave us in relation to resources that you need, do they relate to unfilled existing posts or to posts that would have to be created before they could be filled?
Commissioners, the majority will be unfilled existing posts.
And does your section have any strategy for attracting people to those posts?
Commissioners, credit to the management of the Forensic Science Laboratory. They fought so much to implement what we called scarce skills allowance, where forensic analysts are receiving a certain amount called scarce skills just to retain their skills. Because in the past, our analysts were recruited by countries overseas for their skills. As a result, the FSL management at some point decided to implement a scarce skills in order to try to retain. It works to a certain extent, but you know, as human beings, sometimes the money become used to that allowances and you want more. But currently, in order to attract, this is what the lab has, a scarce skills allowance.
Thanks, Brigadier. Let's move on to a completely different topic. And from paragraph 18, you describe how analysts get assigned to crime scenes. And can you take the Commission through that process?
In respect of crime scenes, the standard procedure at ballistics is that 2 members will be on standby on a rotational basis weekly. They will be assigned vehicles and a cell phone. The stations or the LCRC members, they've got the contact details of the number assigned to the standby. If a scene takes place where ballistics is required, they will call that number, and whoever is on standby will attend. We pair the members in twos for practical reasons that when we are in a crime scene, you must be able to assist one another. So then the members will report. In most cases, we have got the WhatsApp group. They will report and say, there's a crime scene we are attending, just for management to take note. So in terms of crime scene, that is how the process works, Commissioner, under paragraph 18.
And then how does the process proceed from the crime scene all the way through to the lab? Can you take us through paragraphs 19 and 20?
The analyst will attend the crime scene, process the crime scene, take pictures, measurement, reconstruct the scene. On the scene, they will complete a crime scene report, they complete a crime scene form with the details of the case, summarize everything that they saw, and upon arrival at the lab, they will hand over the form to the case management for the case to be registered on the FSL system in order to generate a unique lab number for that particular crime scene. And once the lab number is generated, that crime scene will be assigned to the member who attended the crime scene. Between the members, they will decide. In most instances, you will find one first-time standby or second standby. They will decide who is doing the crime scene amongst them. The crime scene will assign to them. Then they must write a crime scene report explaining all what happened on the crime scene. And the crime scene, the case will then be closed on the FSL system once the crime scene has been issued to the investigating officer.
Now, in paragraph 21, you say that ballistics casework is allocated on a random basis to the analysts by the ballistics analysis commander. But it's not entirely random because you say it has regard to certain considerations. So what are the considerations and how do they affect the assignments?
One of the considerations, Commissioners, is that the member who attended a crime scene, if further evidence are brought to the laboratory, that member will continue with the analysis of that case. So the analysis commander will check before assigning the case. If this case comes as a second entry, he will check who examined the first entry. If it was a crime scene, he will check who is the analyst who went to the crime scene. And he will say, now they are sending a firearm, or now they are sending cartridge cases. So you, the analyst who went and attend the crime scene, you must now proceed with this case. So that is one of the considerations.
Can you explain why you have this policy that if one analyst attends the crime scene, that analyst should also deal with later exhibits that come in?
For practical reasons, Commissioners, it just makes sense that you were on the crime scene, you saw what happened, you have got an idea. So you have already formulated, you have already acclimatized yourself with the case. So it makes sense that when the exhibit comes later on, you proceed. You have already started the work. It's just for practical reasons. It makes it easier. And again, you don't have to assign that one case to multiple analysts where they will have to go and testify on the same case, which may create problems when it comes to chain of custody and the likes. But for practical reasons, the person has already started with the work, so they must complete the work that they've already started.
And of course, in relation to that point you made in relation to multiple analysts having to testify, when an analyst goes to court, that takes resources out of your office, because it's not like the analyst arrives at 10 o'clock, is heard at 10 o'clock, finishes at 11 and comes home. Sometimes the analyst has to spend a day in travel, wait for 2 days while the previous witness finishes, and eventually can be out for several days, having to testify for only a few hours, or even less than an hour.
That is true, Commissioners.
You also refer to level of competence required for ballistics analysis. Can you just explain that concern? Why are some ballistics cases more difficult than others?
Commissioner, ballistics is an in-service training. There's no formal institution in any country where you'll go to university to study ballistics. It is offered in-house. We take you through to levels of training, in different categories of cases, and as you progress, we declare you competent on that particular level of examination. You are qualified. But all in all, for you to be a fully fledged ballistics, you'll have to go through 12 levels or 12 modules, 12 levels of stages of training. And that is determined by the degree of the cases that we analyze. So, for example, someone who's just started training with us, joining us less than a year, they will be examining small cases like only cartridge cases that to identify the caliber. So they won't be able, for example, to do cases where they are required to determine if this firearm is the one which fires these particular cartridge cases. So therefore, when you assign cases, this is one thing that you must also check, the level of training or competency. So as analysts qualifies, they are able to do more complex cases, which you cannot ordinarily assign to junior analysts that are still under training.
Thank you, Brigadier. And then if you can take us to your section about how the ballistics analysis is conducted within your section, starting from paragraph 23.
Maybe before you do that, Brigadier, on just that last answer you gave or explanation you gave, do you find that, are you able to say that you have a sufficient pull, at least in the market, that is the SAPS, taking into account the training that you've described? You have sufficient pool or human resources from which to draw to fill in these positions, and taking into account the different specialties?
Commissioner, when we advertise posts, you'll find out maybe we advertise 5 posts. We received over 200 applications. So the pool is there because of the number of interested people that are applying for those posts. So the pool is always there. The only thing is to have resources to recruit as much as you need. We don't have a problem with the pool, Commissioner.
And can I clarify, is that true both of the ABIS section and the ballistics section?
That is correct, Commissioner.
So if you can take us through the process that you describe in paragraph 24, which deals with the ballistics side before we reach ABIS.
Commissioner, for the purpose of this statement, I will outline the process of conducting a ballistic analysis of linking a firearm with cartridge cases collected from the crime scene. The analyst will receive the case in a sealed bag. They will open the seal, take out the firearm, and complete what we call the pro forma. The pro forma will outline the details of the firearm, the station. Details, I mean the caliber, the make, the manufacture of the firearm, detailing if the firearm is in working condition, and thereafter, he or she will then take ammunition for test purposes, go and shoot tests. And if there are cartridge cases that are collected from the scene and bullets, he will also document the information of those cartridge cases on another pro forma, specific for the ammunition and cartridge cases. With the test that he has shot, he will take the exhibit from the crime scene and the test as a reference to a comparison microscope and compare to see if he can see similarities between the two. If he's satisfied that there are similarities, he will complete another form, which is called comparison microscope form, detailing the results in that form. Then another qualified analyst must come and confirm the results in the microscope. In other words, this analyst will not tell this other analyst that these are my findings. That analyst must, by themselves, go into the microscope and look and see and write what they see and sign a separate comparison microscope form. If they all agree in terms of the results, then the analyst will proceed in his office and compile a Section 212 affidavit in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act and take it for typing or type it himself. And once the report is commissioned as a statement, then he will take the entire case file to an independent case review. The case review is to check quality. They will tick, they've got a checklist that they tick what they are happy with. If they are not happy with the examination, if there are typos, technical, they check technical and administrative review. If they are not happy, they will return the case file to the analyst to go and make corrections. Until they are satisfied, they will then sign and mark that case as a case that meets the standard procedure. And then they will finalize the case on the FSL system and close it. From there, the case will take another route to the case management, where the exhibit will be dispatched to the stations and the case file will be archived at the lab. So that is the process under ballistic. Then the case is final, the analyst is out. Then it will await for the next process of IBIS.
Thank you, Brigadier. There are a couple of questions I want to follow up on. First is to clarify, there are broadly two safeguards built into this process. The one is that there will be independent review. So your initial analyst, who is comparing the test cartridge with the crime scene exhibit, will have reached their own conclusion privately. Those same two artifacts will be handed over to an independent analyst who doesn't know what the original conclusion is, to look at under the microscope and to convey his or her results. And one hopes that they would usually coincide. What happens if they don't coincide? What happens if you have an independent reviewer who says there's a match, there's no match here, but the original one said there is a match?
Commissioner, it does happen a lot. And under those circumstances, they will call a third opinion. They will call another analyst to come and check. And whoever says it's positive, in some instances, I will ask him or say, show me, what is it that you saw? Then they will place the exhibits on the microscope and say, look at this mark and look at this mark. Depending on the quality of the mark and how I'm convinced, I might end up saying, yes, I see what you see. Or I may say, no, despite what you are showing me, I still don't agree. I see, maybe, yes, the mark I see, but it's not sufficient, for example. In my view, I wouldn't make it positive. I wouldn't make it positive. Then the third person will come and say, and eventually there will be some agreements after some persuasion and proving to the other one that this is what I saw besides what is there. It does happen a lot, commissioners.
And then at the end of the process, you have a case reviewer looking at the 212 document. What is the checklist that the case reviewer goes through? What is the case? The case reviewer is not looking at the microscope, for instance. The case reviewer is not doing their own independent analysis. They're just looking at the document that's prepared and that will ultimately go into the docket as a 212 affidavit. So what are they looking for there?
Commission, they will look into the forms that the analyst has used. I've mentioned a pro forma for the firearms, a pro forma for the ammunition. They will check the revision. On an annual basis, our quality process requires that we must review our forms, our procedures. When we review, we give it a latest revision number. So once a form has been reviewed and a new revision has been implemented, we must obsolete all the other forms. You still find some analyst who maybe for some reason still uses an old form. And those are the things that the reviewer must check and tick. Did you use the latest form? You'll check the date, the request, you'll check the covering letter. If the investigating officers requested you to compare this case with another case, they will check, did you address the request from the investigating officer? They will check the dates, the sealback numbers. Do the sealback numbers correspond with what we have received and what we have documented? So they tick, there's a tick checklist that they tick yes, no. If there's a no, they write no, the dates, or no, the sealback number is wrong. Then they return, then they'll say no, the case must go back, you must go and rectify whatever they've ticked in there. So that is basically what the reviewers are doing, commissioners.
Thank you, Brigadier. So there is literally a form with tick boxes that they have to, that identifies what they've got to go through.
That is correct. And after that, they must sign their signature so that we can be able to track and trace who did the case, who reviewed the case. And then when they are satisfied, they will close the case on the FSL system. That also will show us who reviewed the case, the date in which it was reviewed and finalized.
Could you send through, it doesn't have to be immediate, but could you send us a copy of that form that the reviewer has to check through so that we understand exactly what those boxes are? We'll have Captain Mkachwa and Captain Modisani coming to testify. I'm sure one of them, we can make an exhibit to their evidence in due course, because they presumably would know what that form looks like.
Certainly, yes, Commissioner. It's unfortunate I didn't bring a case file because it's always in the case file, so I would have just produced it now if I had the case file with me.
Thank you. We're now coming to the ABIS system, and a lot of the section that you describe from paragraph 26 onwards has already been touched on, so I'm going to ask you to jump around a little bit because we shouldn't duplicate what's already happened. But the first point that you make is that the ballistics analysis process and the ABIS process are conducted independently of one another, that the ballistics analyst isn't the person who deals with the ABIS side of the analysis. And can you explain why that is the case?
That is true, Commissioners. In the past, we had a one-stop for all, where the ballistic analyst will analyze a case. After analysis, he or she will go to the IBIS station to acquire the specimen that need to be acquired on IBIS. During that process, we started experiencing problems because we had a situation where the analysts were saying we are adding extra work, which in terms of their KPA, key performance area, is not there. While you have a subsection called IBIS, which is responsible for all IBIS responsibilities. So there was that, because of that reluctance from the analyst, we end up having problems with the quality of images, which affect the quality of hits that you will generate. Then management had to take a tough decision that despite the fact that IBIS is understaffed, but we'll have to relieve the analyst of these responsibilities, and it must remain the sole responsibilities of IBIS. And from there on, we started to even go as far as generating a lab number for IBIS so that we can be able to account for the work that comes to IBIS once the case has been analyzed and completed at ballistics. It has to go through the process of registration where an IBIS lab number is assigned or to that particular case until it is assigned to an analyst and acquired on IBIS. So that is the background as to how this came about. And that created this independent between IBIS and ballistics. IBIS has a point where they end, ballistics has a point where they end, and IBIS has a point where they start and continue further.
Now, most of the rest of the IBIS process through paragraph 27.2 all the way through to 27.7, I think we've already addressed. Do you want quickly just to skim through those paragraphs, and if there's anything you want to add to what you've said already, please do.
Commissioner, I think I've covered all of them.
Then if we can go to 27.8, and so we've now gone through the IBIS process. We found the exhibits have been acquired into the IBIS system. The system has generated possible hits. The analyst has sat in front of the screen and has confirmed certain hits. The exhibits have been requisitioned. And another analyst has sat in front of a microscope and has confirmed that the hits that the system thought were good hits are in fact good hits. That analyst, then you say, prepares a new, or their own Section 212 affidavit.
That is correct, Commissioners.
And then 27.9, after we've now finished this process, can you just read 27.9 and explain it to us?
A Section 212 affidavit is submitted to the case management section, who will then dispatch the affidavit through the ICDMS. The ICDMS will then trigger the SAPS CAS system to flag the hits identified. This is a latest development. In the past, we were working in silos. We were generating hits, sending the report to the stations, only to find out most of those cases were already closed as untraceable at the stations. We were not getting feedback of the hits, of the intelligence that we are generating. Then there was an improvement that the system, where they linked the FSL system with the ICDMS, when you scan through the 212 report, it automatically trigger the CAS system at the station to reopen the case or to flag it. Whoever works on the station, the branch commander or whoever, will then be notified. When it goes on the system, they will take note that this case has linkages with other cases, and they will be forced to print the report on ICDMS and check what are the linkages. That will force them to start to follow those linkages. And as such, a credit to the detective services, they've also added this particular performance in the KPA of the detectives. So they are also being measured on how they follow those linkages. If they don't, they have been penalized. So they must always make sure that they follow them and investigate so that there must be outcome. What happened to those hits?
But this is the first point, that the results of a match generated by ABIS get communicated to the investigating officers on the ground. You have an automated system here that will then go to every SAPS police station in the country, and if your investigation has now been linked through IBIS, you'll get a notification automatically at your police station that this is the case.
That is correct, Commissioners. That will be.
And to go back to our earlier discussion, up until this point, although it may be 2-3 years since you asked for your first ballistics report, you wouldn't know that the murder you're investigating is linked to 2, 3, 4, 5 other crimes in different police stations.
Definitely, you wouldn't know except the links that IBIS has generated and are communicated to the investigating officer, Commissioners.
And for those 2, 3, 4 years, you would have been pursuing your investigation without any coordination with the other investigations into a related crime.
That is correct, Commissioners.
Can we then move on to the audit trail? And can you discuss the audit provisions in the FSL system and the ABIS system that you describe from paragraph 28 onwards?
Commissioner, with regard to the IBIS system, for you to be able to gain access into the system, you must be registered with your biometric. In other words, if you are not registered with your biometric, you will not be able to access the IBIS system. And that is so that we can be able to know what happened on the system, because the system keeps logs, who logged on at what time and what happened. So it's for that purpose, track and trace. With the FSL system, you must apply for a password for you to gain access into the system. The password expires after certain days, and every time you must renew your password. So again, the passwords, no one is allowed to use someone's password. So there's in order to ensure credibility of the systems.
And so at any given time, you can see the audit trail, both in FSL and in ABIS, of who did what when.
That is correct, Commissioners.
And is it possible to modify the audit trail? Does anyone have administrator rights that enable them to override or add anything to the audit trail?
That is not possible, Commissioners, because you will see whoever worked on the case, the logs will show. So you'll still know if there was anyone who tried to do something on the case or whatever on the system.
My question is slightly different. Does anyone have the IT capability or the IT authority to modify an audit trail? Is there anyone with system permissions that would enable them to modify an audit trail?
Commissioner, the FSL system is managed by TMS. This is the administrator of the system. So they are administering the system. They are the ones that authorizes passwords. So if there are any audit trails that needs to be done, they will be the people that can answer in that regards.
And who are TMS?
It's the division within the Forensic Science Laboratory that is responsible for technology management system.
And do they manage both the FSL system and the ABIS system in relation to audit trails?
That is correct, Commissioners.
Thank you, Brigadier. We're now finally, with a lot of background, going to get into the audit trail and the events relating to the Vereeniging and Bramley cases. But I want to assure the Commissioners that the background is very important, because one does need to understand in some detail how the system works before one goes into the specifics. So let's move to the ballistics analysis in both Vereeniging and Bramley. And can you take up what you describe from paragraph 31 of your statement?
Commissioners, on the 17th of April 2024, a murder crime was reported and attended by Captain Mahotlo and Warrant Officer Masha, who were both on standby on that day. The members were called by Warrant Officer Malan, an SAPS official from LCRC, to attend the crime scene. The crime scene involved a murder of Mr. Swart, who was shot while entering the premises of his employer. A murder case 275 of 4 of 2024 was registered for the Vereeniging case. Paragraph 32, while Captain Mahotlo and Warrant Officer Masha were busy processing the crime scene in Vereeniging, it was reported that suspects who shot and killed the deceased were arrested in Bramley, and that the suspects were found in possessions of firearms, ammunition, and cartridges. Case number 149 of 04-2024 was registered under the Bramley case.
And Brigadier, can I just stop you here? So Captain Mahotlo and Warrant Officer Masha were the members who were on standby